Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 16 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. I had such a great discussion with Katie Barrows-Rempe for this episode. Katie is actually a very good friend of mine in real life, and I'm so glad she was willing to sit down with me and share her perspective and tips from her 8 years as a widowed parent. Katie and I talked about so many topics, including the importance of lining up help to give yourself a break and designating regular times to get out of the house, cave days for yourself and hooky days for your kids, tips on communicating with kids' schools, both in the early days and as they get older and change schools, how her family celebrates birthdays and anniversaries, supporting kids through milestones, connecting with other widows, deciding to start dating after loss, and her youngest child having special needs and what that has meant for his grief process. I hope you enjoy my discussion with Katie Barrows-Rempe. My guest today is Katie Barrows-Rempe, who is joining us from her home in Bellevue, Washington. Katie is a remarried widow and the parent of 4 kids. Katie, welcome.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, Jenny.
So today's episode will be a little bit different from some of the more recent episodes, which featured experts on different topics, and I really enjoyed asking them questions about their work and their books, and bringing those discussions to listeners. I do think it's also important that we learn from those who are ahead of us on this widowhood path. So today I'm really excited to be talking to Katie. She's been such a help to me in my own journey, starting when my husband was first diagnosed with brain cancer and continuing to the present day, actually. She's 8 years out now from her loss, and she has so much to share about her experience. So Katie, I'm glad you're here today.
Thank you very much.
Before we get more into your experience and reflections, can you set the stage for us a little bit? I'd love to hear a little bit about your life before your husband died. What was life like back then?
Well, life was crazy back then. I used to call it life under the circus tent. We had 4 kids, and we had just had our 4th baby, and he was born with Down syndrome. And so at the time, I had a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and an infant. And that infant, of course, had special needs. And so life was crazy. We had kids in school, we had kids in preschool, we had diapers, we had feeding, we had all sorts of therapies for Tommy, the youngest. And it was fun. It was crazy. We were surrounded by our families and our friends and our neighbors. And it was already challenging, but it was what we wanted, and it was what I felt I was always meant to do. So it was all positive, but we were busy.
Yeah. Okay. And so what changed? What happened?
So Tommy was 4 months old, and I got a phone call that my husband had had a seizure at work, and they were taking him to the hospital. And we had a friend that had not survived brain cancer just a few years past. And I kind of knew, I feel like I knew immediately that this was not going to be good. He didn't have a history of seizures. This was a totally new event for us. And running to the hospital, finding out he had a brain tumor, most likely would be malignant. That was like a brand new day in my life. Like the old life ended, new life beginning, starting right now. How are we going to handle this? And like I mentioned before, we both came from big families that were incredibly supportive. Everybody jumped right in doing research and laundry, food, all of the things that people do when they know you're in a crisis mode. And, so we got started. We got tied in with an excellent hospital, excellent physicians, and research was going on. And so we just started.
And how long then was it before he did pass away?
He survived for almost 2.5 years.
Wow.
So
okay.
That was 2 craniotomies, a couple rounds of chemo and radiation. At the end, it became difficult as he was really in a lot of pain. So he had always been functioning. It was just that he couldn't drive. First it started that he lost some independence, and then it got to be so that he couldn't really work. But then he lost his eyesight, and that was really, really a challenge because, now he had zero independence. He was starting to take really heavy pain meds. And so I guess that was the decline. But, in the process that took almost 2.5 years. So we had time. They did say, we think you have 1.5 years, or we think you have 2 years. So we knew what was coming, and I guess I'd like to say we had a good life all the way through it. There were hard moments, of course, but we were still living our lives. So, and with 4 kids, you really don't have a choice.
Right.
No matter what.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for sharing that with us. And so then the kids were how old when he died?
When he died, they were 10 and 8, 4 and 2.
Okay. And so what were those early months like, or the early time period, however you define that? Like what were some of your biggest challenges right off the bat?
Exhaustion. I was so incredibly exhausted. It was exhausting caring for my husband all the way right to the end. And then, I guess, third life started, now life without Johnny B. And I was so tired. I would get up in the mornings and try and get the kids off to school. And as soon as I could, I'd crawl back into bed. And then, so here's my practical tip number 1 is get some help. So we had a fabulous babysitter that had been with us for years and years and years. And she started coming over at 7 in the mornings and would help me get the kids up and out of bed. And we had to get one to school, one to preschool. Tommy was an infant. It was crazy anyway. On your best day, it was crazy mornings. And so having her come and help, she would come for about 2 hours, and it was fabulous. So that helped me immensely. And then the quiet time during the middle of the day, I was able to get a little bit of rest or take Tommy to his therapy appointments.
I was going to say, 'cause you must have still had Tommy at home. You had 2 at school and 1 at preschool and Tommy at home.
Right.
Okay. So that must have cut down on the amount of just crashing you could do.
Yeah, there was no crashing unless I could pull him, snuggle in my bed, and we just kind of take some quiet time.
Right. Okay. Was there any advice that you got early on that was particularly helpful, or maybe that was not helpful?
Well, I had been part of a support group when Johnny B was sick. It was a caregiver support group, and slowly but surely, given the nature of brain cancer, it became our bereavement group. And so we had helped each other through this process. We'd been together for years. And my favorite advice was the idea of cave days.
Oh,
I
yes.
remember sharing with you, Jenny.
Yes, please tell everybody about this because I think it's brilliant.
Practical advice number 2, cave days. So you picture your bed or somewhere nice and cozy in your house as a cave. And you give yourself permission to have a cave day. And sometimes it's great to plan ahead and say, I'm going to have a cave day on Friday. The kids are going to be gone all day. I'm going to do nothing or whatever I want. I'm going to eat chips in bed. I'm going to watch a movie, or I'm just going to crash. I'm going to cry. Whatever you want to do is super cool. And sometimes you might just need that cave day without planning ahead. It doesn't really matter. It's just the idea that you give yourself time to do what you need to do. It's quiet, and nobody else is around. So if you're crying, it doesn't really matter. If you're, you can really be doing whatever you want. But I think permission to give yourself time to do that is really important, and as often as you need it.
As soon as you told me about this, I tried it, and I loved it. And the thing that I think I liked about it is I felt like it was a sick day without being sick, right?
Exactly.
Like normally a sick day you might have to check out of everyday life for the day because you're feeling you have the flu or something so miserable, right, that you can't do your normal activities. But this was like, wow, I get to check out for the day, and I don't have to feel lousy.
Exactly. Yeah, and you can plan ahead and make it kind of fun. I mean, there's nothing wrong with picking your favorite movie or your favorite book or your favorite pint of ice cream. It's all for you, and you deserve it. You totally need it. And yeah, exactly. It's like a little vacation day.
Yeah. Do you think that that would apply to kids as well?
Oh, definitely. I've also always been a proponent of hooky days, is what we used to call them with the kids. So if the kids need a day, they can tell me. Usually I would give them 1 or 2 in a whole school year. But, if you have kids that are grieving, then they should be able to call that whenever they want, as long as it's not too many times and they're not missing too much. But yeah, what a gift for kids to have themselves, to know that they need time every once in a while.
So how about, so speaking of school, I guess, I wonder if you have tips on communicating with your kids' teachers or your kids' school, and maybe in stages, I guess maybe initially right off the bat. We'll talk in a minute about switching schools or getting older, but, just in those early days. I know that you and I also were at a school that was small and tight-knit, and people pretty much knew what was going on. But do you have any thoughts about, I guess, how to work with the school or the teachers?
I worked with the school a lot. I kept the principal, the vice principal, and the teachers of my students. My children, sorry. I kept them apprised as things were happening. So if we had an MRI day, if we had a surgery day, if we were getting news, anything like that, I would tell them. And I didn't really expect them to do anything with the information. I did expect them to keep their eyes open and see if my kids needed anything extra, and to always please get back to me if they saw a change or a difference or tears or anything like that. So any big things that are coming up. And then once he did pass, then I always check in and say, hey, we've got a birthday coming up, or this is the anniversary of his death coming up. And I do that for the younger kids. So I think everybody just appreciates having that information. And I don't think it's oversharing. They don't have to answer. But in the event that my child was having a rough day, I would like to know that the teachers or the administration is just keeping an extra eye on them.
Okay. And then how about, so when your husband died, they were all young, still in grade school. How about as they got older? I think, and by the way, how old are your kids now?
The oldest is 18, and she's a freshman in college. I have a 17-year-old in high school, a 12-year-old in 7th grade, and Tommy is 10.
Okay. So they've obviously grown quite a lot and moved into high school, and one of them into college even. So I guess as they've gotten older and moved into high school, did your dealing with the schools change around this topic?
Yes, I really didn't know what to do when they changed schools. And I asked my oldest daughter, do you think I should tell school? And absolutely not was her answer. Of course not. Please don't do that, Mom.
This was going into 9th grade, right?
Going into 9th grade, correct.
Okay.
So I didn't. And it was really an interesting time to watch her try and figure out who does she tell and who does she not tell. And she chose to not tell anyone. Like we mentioned, our kids were in a very tight-knit community school where everybody knew everything about everyone. They'd been to school together for 8 years. So coming into a new school, it was kind of a chance for her to, she was changing her identity anyway as a 9th grader, but nobody knew her background. Nobody knew that she had a brother with special needs or that her father had died. And the only time it really came up was in biology class. They were talking, I believe they had to do a research paper or something. Someone did brain cancer. And so that was a bit of a trigger. And so I did talk to that teacher. I said, hey, I'm assuming you don't know, but KK's dad died of brain cancer. And then interestingly enough, later in the year, genetics came up in biology. And so I said, hey, interestingly enough, KK has a brother with Down syndrome. But, that was all, it was just part of learning. That was fine. I think it probably was uncomfortable for her when they're talking about these things that she has intimate knowledge of. But it didn't affect her enough to change her behavior.
So I wonder about relationships with peers and how much, to disclose or not disclose, or whether that's tricky. when you're within maybe a new peer group? I'm talking, if all the classmates initially knew being in the small school, but then as the kids grew, did you have any experiences with that?
I did have experiences with that, and I still find it challenging. And certainly worth mentioning, though, let me tell you at the beginning, I don't have an answer, except to have a conversation with your kids. So one example is one of my kids started a new sport. And again, it was a new situation, new kids, and chose not to share this information. I think kids don't always want to be identified as the one whose dad died. Mm-hmm. And sometimes it causes other kids to be uncomfortable around you if they think, oh, how do I react around her? Her dad died. What do I do? So in this situation, she chose not to tell anyone. It was the beginning, a brand new experience for her. So why would you come in and say, oh, hi, my name's so-and-so. I lost my dad a year ago. So what was interesting, though, is as she built relationships with these kids, at some point it would have been appropriate to say, my dad died, or my mom's remarrying. The reason why is because my dad died. So that became a really uncomfortable situation for her because she never quite did find the right time. And these kids became her very best friends. This was a new community for her. And to finally get the courage to say, oh, by the way, it's not an oh, by the way thing, but now these kids, you're such good friends and there's something you haven't shared. Mm-hmm. But that's not an easy thing to share. And I don't know when is appropriate. It's certainly not appropriate at the very beginning of a relationship. And you certainly don't want to be judged by that. So I don't know. And I'll say for myself too, I'm 8 years out. It's no longer a huge part of my identity that my husband died. It is, it's always who I am, but sometimes I don't know whether to share that with new people that I'm meeting in my life. And, sometimes it comes up and I'll say it, and sometimes I just don't say it. And
in your case, it might not be obvious to somebody because you are remarried. Exactly. So somebody might not, there isn't the immediate question like, well, why isn't she wearing a ring? Or there doesn't seem to be, a husband around. In your case, they might just assume, that your family as it is now is how it's always been. Mm-hmm. And that assumption is fine with me. And if for some reason we would have a shared experience where it would be important to say, I've been through this before, then I would. Mm-hmm. But it's really interesting because I feel like I kind of have two lives. I have the people who know me as Katie Barrows and Katie Rempe and Katie Barrows-Rempe. And it gets a little confusing, but I'm all the same person. Okay. How about celebrating things like birthdays and death anniversaries? Through the years, you've had, I guess, 8 years or so now of doing that. I wonder, I guess, how have you guys handled that? And do you have any suggestions or advice around that topic? Yes. So I've had 8 different years of celebrations. I never came up with one thing that I thought was really great, although listening to your podcast, I've heard some fabulous ideas. In particular, the one where this woman's family has chosen a different charity that would have affected her husband in some way. I love that idea. Yes. She and her children raised money for that. I think that's an excellent idea. I wish I would have done that. But we've done something different every year, and sometimes it's just whatever feels right. So in the beginning, I can remember going to church and lighting a candle. And I was sure to go when there was no mass going on because I knew that I would cry, and I'm not one to make a scene, but I didn't want any public to know what I was doing. So I would, go in and light some candles and bring the kids. And that was very powerful. It didn't take a lot of time, and it just felt like I had a connection to him there. So that's one way that we've done it. One year we went out after dinner, went to a restaurant and got the biggest desserts we possibly could find and just shared stories. So we've tried a lot of different things. I can't say that any one thing is perfect. I did
bury Johnny B's ashes at this river. So right after he died, I would go hiking. That was one of my ways to kind of have time for myself. And I didn't know what to do with his ashes. We'd had 2 years to talk about how we were going to live without him, but we didn't ever talk about what am I going to do with your body. And so I spent about 6 months hiking around our area trying to find a spot for him that I thought nature would be great. And so I found that spot, and that is one thing that we do somewhat regularly. I'll bring the kids out and we'll go and we'll just hang out on the river right there. And I've brought family. And this year I decided to open it up and bring friends and neighbors. And the reason I did that was really because I wanted my daughter, who's now in college, to kind of find a way that she could mark these days now that she's not at home with us. In the past, I would have brought all the kids. If it was a school day, maybe we played hooky that day or took a half day or went after school. And we used to go and do whatever it was we chose to do. But getting back to that identity thing, and when do you share that my dad has died, I kind of challenged her to share this year on the anniversary of his death. And I don't know if she did or not, but it struck me that I've been doing these things in my little community with myself. I've got my kids. I have a group of people that are my tight-knit family. And I haven't had to really reach out and do that with my friends. And so after I had said to my daughter, maybe you tell someone, this is a hard day for me. My dad died on this day. I thought, well, maybe I should be doing the same thing. So even though my friends have the day marked, everybody knows what day it is, and I get really nice texts and emails and things thinking of you today. I had never offered to share that place. So this year, on very short notice, I did invite some friends, and it was really special, and it felt really good to have someone to share that with me. Also, this year, that the kids did not want to come with me. Nobody wanted to come and do that with me. So I guess it worked out really nicely. But that was a risk for me. It helped me realize how the kids feel, how risky that is to say, hey, this is a hard day for me. Would you like to spend it with me? Mm-hmm. That's hard, and that's hard for me. So that was a big risk for me. I'll do it again because I know it was good for me. And it just helps me to realize when I have the courage to say, hey, this is hard, I end up getting support. Mm-hmm. If I keep it quiet to myself, I make it true. I make it through that day just fine. But life is a little bit richer when you're willing to share it with others. Mm-hmm. So it's not easy.
I love how you're modeling that then for your kids too. I mean, thinking about what might be challenging for them, and then how you can model that kind of behavior that might help them as well. I love that. Okay, so one thing I was wondering about, I've heard it said that kids need to re-grieve as they go through different developmental milestones. Is that something that you have experienced or have any thoughts about?
I have not seen re-grieving. I have seen the kids resetting, I guess would be my way of saying it. So they do need to see themselves in a different light, and I do believe that they have to reassess what this means for them. So going to college or going to high school, again, part of it is that identity. Am I going to share this? And then how's it going to affect me now that I don't have a dad? Driving has been mentioned in some of your podcasts. That's a new one. Like, I guess my mom's going to teach me how to drive. Mm-hmm. Or, there's some milestones, getting your first suit or going to your first dance. It's all those times when there's a first experience for your kids. Mm-hmm. They're first experiencing it without their dad. Mm-hmm. And I can't say how much they are thinking about it, because my kids are fairly quiet. They don't always share what they're thinking. And sometimes I'll say it out loud, realizing that they're probably thinking, oh, dad would have loved this, or something like that.
So then you'll jump in and say, gosh, Dad would have loved this, to kind of like get the elephant out of the room a little bit?
Yeah. Or I'd say, your dad would be so proud of you. Or do you remember that time, or this is what Dad did. If I have a story about when your dad did this, your dad's first dance, or if I have a photo that can relate to what they're going through. But it seems to me that, of course, with developmental stages comes their new experiences. So dances, driving, things like that. And, if I mention it first, that seems to help a little bit.
Okay. Jumping back to cave days, and I think that maybe brings up the broader topic of self-care. I wondered if we could talk about that a little bit, and maybe, so, I mean, you had 4 children, quite young at first, still have 4 children. Any thoughts about trying to carve out time for yourself? How, either whether you were able to do that successfully, whether it was important, and maybe tips on doing that?
Yes. I think, first of all, that honoring yourself is the most important thing you can do. I believe that as widowed parents, we work incredibly hard, it's a constant job. You may be working in the house, you may be working out of the house, but these kids are always on your mind. The well-being of your children is constant on your mind. And so I have an 18-year-old, just because she's out of the house right now doesn't mean that she's not always on my mind. And so one, please recognize how hard you're working and appreciate that about yourself, because you were thrown into this situation, however it happened, and you are surviving. You're here today. If you're listening to this, you're surviving. You're trying to make your life better. And so I think the first part of that is just recognizing, we work really hard and we need breaks. And so that was something that I got lucky with, because I mentioned I had this fabulous babysitter. Well, I just decided one day that I needed to get out of this house. I need some sanity. I need some fresh air. And I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to set up anything. I didn't necessarily want to see my girlfriends. I just needed to get out of my house. And so this babysitter came every Tuesday night for years. And so every Tuesday night, it was just known. The kids already knew. I never had to explain what I was doing, although I did if I had anything fun I was doing. I got really good at going to movies by myself. I had never gone to a movie by myself. Turns out Tuesdays are great because there's nobody there. And I found a movie theater where they will bring you dinner and a glass of wine, and there's a blanket. And that was perfect. I didn't have to talk to anybody. I'd love to go out for dinner, but I didn't want to go sit by myself in a restaurant. That takes a little more courage than I had at the time. So I wouldn't even care what movie was playing. I would pick the movie based on the time that my babysitter was coming. So my kids used to make fun of me for that, but that was fine. And then sometimes I would go out with friends, but there were a lot of times I just didn't have the energy, or I didn't want to talk to anyone. I just needed to get out of the house. So making a regular time out of the house was fabulous. That was one of the best things I ever did. And then I could segue that into dating a little bit, because when I chose to start dating, I already had that built in, and it wasn't any big deal for the kids because they knew Tuesday night was my night out, so it didn't really matter. And if I chose to tell them, that was fine. But if I chose not to tell them, that was also fine. And they got to see again a model of like, this is what parents do. Yes, my mom is here for me all the time, but she needs a life too. And so that kind of, it was a good example for them, I think, that, this is my time and I get to do what I want. And they were very respectful of that.
That's great. I love that. And that idea of modeling too, that, you are their parent and you are Katie and you have a life too, on top of all your responsibilities and tons of time you're spending with them.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, so you mentioned sometimes going out with girlfriends, and I guess I wonder, in terms of connecting with other widows, either early on or more recently or at any time in this journey. Any thoughts about that?
Yes. Isn't it funny that once something happens in your life, you are turned on to all these other people that
Yes.
are experiencing the same thing.
Yes.
So all of a sudden, I had this one friend that had brain cancer, and don't you know it, we end up having brain cancer in our family as well. But then all of a sudden that world gets smaller, and you're meeting more and more people with brain cancer for various reasons, of course. But somehow I believe you can become a resource should you choose to. And I also believe that's really a healthy way of moving on. And so just in our neighborhood that Jenny and I live in, there's a number of widows, and we all reach out to one another, which I think is fabulous. And while it's not a formal support group or anything like that, we do tend to reach out, even if it's on a text message, a group message, saying, hey, this is the day, this is a day for me, an anniversary day for me, or just whatever happens to be going on. So I think we have great support for one another. And gosh, Jenny, if it's okay to share, when I had found out that your husband had brain cancer, another neighbor called me and said, did you hear about Jenny? I said, no. What's going on? And I called you immediately. And we had only met once or twice.
Mm-hmm. We had briefly met once before that. We didn't, because our kids were in different grades, so we didn't really know each other at that point.
Exactly. So, now we're excellent, fabulous friends because of this shared experience. And together, we continue to reach out to other widows. And I think it's such a nice support group that we have. Mm-hmm. And it's a fabulous thing to do for others. And it feels really good to think, okay, I went through all of this hard stuff and I can share it with someone. Mm-hmm. If one person takes one cave day after this, I'm going to feel fabulous. Mm-hmm. I believe it's part of the healing process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I mean, just on cave days alone, I mean, you told me about it. Then I remember we got together recently with another widowed friend, and you told a newly widowed friend, you told her about cave days, and then she texted later, oh, I took a cave day. It was awesome.
And so on and so on. And
yeah.
So on. Yeah.
And one of the things I think is great about our group, and that I'd encourage people to, try to connect in some way, whether it's virtually or in person. We've got people at all different stages, from a very recent loss of a few months ago to several years to many, many years. And everyone's at different stages in their lives. And I know I've learned a lot from listening and talking with those of you who are ahead of me. So I really appreciate that. And I guess it always surprises me. Maybe we're just unusual here that we happen to know so many people in person right nearby who are widowed. I do know there's a lot of listeners out there and other widows out there who don't actually have anybody in their immediate circles, communities or school groups or whatever, who are widowed. So I appreciate the fact that, that we do have that to support each other. Let's see. You mentioned before having these Tuesday nights reserved as your time to go out and do whatever by yourself or with girlfriends, or eventually you mentioned dating. I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that, about how and when you decided to start dating and kind of what that process looks like for you.
Yes. So my parents, who are in their 80s, are the ones that were the first people that broached going on dates with me. And as they have lived their life, they had had a lot of experience where people had been widowed, and some remarried and some did not. And so they talked to me and said, do you think you'd ever want to get married again? And my first reaction was, no, are you kidding me? What are you talking about? This is outrageous. And then about 6 months go by. So let me think. When they first had that conversation with me, that would have maybe been 1 year had gone by. And that did not feel right to me at all. And so periodically I would get a little, have you thought about dating? And slowly but surely, of course, I did start to think about dating. And then my parents said, well, we have this theory that if you let 3 years go by you're much less likely to get married again or be in a long-term relationship again. And I thought that was really interesting because they had just said that had been their experience. Ways and you like things the way you like them, you're less apt to be able to accept another person into your life. That was their theory. And so that was probably the one thing that hit home for me, like maybe I shouldn't wait 5 years. Maybe I shouldn't wait till the kids are out of the house. You know, the kids are never going to be out of the house. The kids, they were so young. It wasn't like I could wait 14 years and then, oh, maybe I'll go on a date.
Uh-huh.
So my mom came over one day and she said, have you heard about Match.com? Now picture my mom is like 5 feet and 80 years old. Yeah, I have heard about Match.com. And she's like, well, let's make a, what do you call that, Jenny?
A profile?
Let's make a profile. And so we did together and it was hilarious. And then that night after she left, of course, I changed it a little bit. And anyway, that was a hoot. So on one day, I decided I wanted to go on a date. And these apps are amazing. It was a Monday morning, and I was going to go on a date on that Tuesday because I knew I had free time. By goodness, I found a date. It was a really funny one, but I wasn't dating at that point. I wasn't dating to find a husband. I was just really bored, and I had seen an awful lot of movies all by myself, and I thought I was ready to have some conversation. So I went on a lot of first dates, a couple of second dates, a couple of third dates, and this is over maybe the span of a year or so. And after having a date or two with someone, I always went back and changed my profile a little bit. I would filter because what I saw was happening was, actually, I did care who I was going on a date with. At first, I was like, I'm just going to try a date. It doesn't matter who this person is. I just need to try this. And then, of course, as it makes sense, you want to have more things in common with a person. And then I started learning, that in my case, I didn't want to date anybody else that had kids because I didn't see any way possible that I could take on any more. And I thought to myself, if I don't have any kids, I'd be happy to date someone with children. But in my case, 4 kids, one with special needs was just not going to happen. So I filtered and filtered and filtered. And another time my mom was over. She used to come over in the mornings and help out. She was over and we had this one picture of a guy. And I was like, Mom, this one's cute. And we had a few conversations online and we were going to meet. And, when you're online, you never give your last name. So we had been talking to one another. And at one point, the man that I was talking to online said where he grew up and where he went to school. And it turned out that was exactly where I grew up and where I went to school. Of course, his profile picture was of a 50-year-old man. So my mom and I are trying to make the screen bigger and see if we can figure out who could this possibly be. We have to know him. And so then I decided I would write back and give my maiden name. And I also went to that school, and it turns out we knew each other. And so when we went on our first date, it was so easy because we had grown up. We had gone to the same school. Our parents knew each other. Our siblings knew each other. And that is actually the man I ended up marrying.
Ah, what a great story.
I know. And we have so much in common. And when we see each other's families, it's like we already knew each other, though not well. I just knew of his family and he knew of my family. But it was able to remove all of that time that it would have taken to get to know someone's family and to get to know all their history and everything. So it was a very natural fit for us. And he had never married and never had kids. And so that seemed to work for the situation that I was in, having 4 kids and dogs and everything else.
A very full and busy life.
Correct.
Yes. Okay. Great. Thank you. You mentioned that your youngest has special needs. I wonder if you have any observations or, just, I guess, on how the grief experience has been with him, maybe versus your other kids who are more typically developing.
The grief experience with him has been really interesting. One, he was very young when his dad died.
He was an infant when he was diagnosed, and then 2, you said?
Correct. Yeah, he was 2.5 when his dad died. And so I would say all or most of his memories are tied to photos.
Mm-hmm.
So he'll look at that picture, and every time he wants to talk about his dad, he'll say, "Remember that picture of me with dad?"
Mm.
So that's really interesting. And I guess that would be true for all younger kids. I think my memory is tied to photos as well. So he has had to learn about his dad through stories for the most part. And so that's actually been fabulous for the older kids because they have to tell him a story about their dad in order to help him understand or try and remember something. And I think that's been therapeutic for the older kids.
Mm.
It kind of forces them to talk about it. My kids are not big talkers. They don't share everything with me. They share very little with me, actually. But so that's been good. So as it started when he was young, he was the listener. Well, now he's our spokesperson. And so he doesn't really have a filter to say, this would be inappropriate or this might hurt someone's feelings or anything like that. And it doesn't. But he'll come out and say whatever he's thinking about his dad at the time, which is great. It keeps the conversation open. And his processing is quite a bit slower than everyone, and he just currently is in a stage right now where he's processing the loss of his dad. And it's really interesting. He's talking about heaven, and he's talking about his old dad, and he's trying to figure out John, my new husband, where does he fit in? You're not my dad. And it's true, he's not his dad. He's his and or his other, or I love the way some of your people have mentioned that. But the great thing about Tommy is that he just says it out loud and opens the conversation for all of us. And so that's really been a gift. And then it's also a gift to watch him figure this out, because it gives me the knowledge that he's working through it. Mm-hmm. Sometimes when our kids are quiet, I don't really know how they're doing. I would love it if they would all talk to me about it all the time, but they really don't. And so when Tommy brings it up, it opens the conversation for the rest of the family.
Mm-hmm. Okay. There's one other thing I'm thinking of here related to your kids. You mentioned to me a tip about hugging one time. Can you share that with listeners?
Oh, yes. Okay, this was shared to me by someone in my support group years ago, and it was for women in particular, because if your husband had died, chances are your kids were having different physical touch with your dad than with your mom. You know, your mom's all snuggly and soft and is gentle with you. And your dad might be a little bit rougher. If your dad gives you a hug, it might be like a tough squeezy one, or your dad might punch you on the arm, or, it's just a different kind of touch. And so it was suggested to me to find ways to give my kids big squeezy hugs, like big strong arms, and that physical feeling for them is a way for them to be concrete and feel like, okay, I'm all right. I've got this. My mom is here. And while it may not be a thought going through their heads, you are giving them that physical reassurance that you've got this. You're here. You're strong. And so I still do that. My 17-year-old is like 6'2", and I still grab him and hug him, and he doesn't like it, but so be it. That's how it's going to be.
I love that. I'll have to remember to try that with my 14-year-old today.
He's going to love it.
I'm sure. Maybe deep down on some level, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So earlier you talked a little bit about identity with kids, and the identity as the kid whose dad died. I wonder, in terms of identity for yourself as a widow, was that hard to come to terms with? Is that a weird, I guess, how have you dealt with that or grappled with that over time?
That was a huge challenge for me, Jenny. I can remember just being surprised when we first found out that my husband was ill and he wasn't going to survive. And then the shock when he did finally die, I think it really hit me when I had to start dealing with all the financial situations. And, there's an entire list of things you need to do. And so I would get on the phone and I would introduce myself, and I have to be closing an account of some sort, or I need to be changing the account. And it just struck me that here I am introducing myself saying, hi, my husband just died. I need to do this, this, and this. And then upon more thought, realizing I am a widow with 4 kids, one of them with a lot of really special needs. Wait, this is who I am? You went from not very long ago saying, oh, hi, my name's Katie. So nice to meet you. And all of my people are around me. My kids are around me. So it's clear. It's obvious that, I'm a busy woman. But to think through, I am a widow, was really hard. And then I have to say, it went kind of negative, because there must have been some point when someone was super duper nice to me because I was a widow with 4 children, one with special needs. And then I can remember thinking, maybe they'll help me out because I'm a widow with 4 children. And that was bad. Now I was like a victim. And this is over a long period of time, however. This didn't come to me quickly. And so to start to think of myself as someone else, and I think that probably happened when I was dating, because I didn't want that to be who I was. Once again, I wanted to be myself. I wanted to be Katie. Hi, nice to meet you. And yes, I have this history of, some hard things have happened in my past, but I want you to meet me. And so maybe it was the process of meeting new people on my own terms that brought me kind of out of that. And so now that I'm married, again, it's a new identity. And I've talked to you about this before. Am I still a widow? I think I am, but I'm also remarried.
I think the consensus in the widow community is that once a widow, always a widow. You can be a remarried widow. And that doesn't erase what's happened in your past, that it has affected you, in multiple ways. It doesn't mean it has to define your identity, but it's, you wouldn't want to erase that from your history.
Exactly. That's exactly how I feel. That's a great way of putting it. So yes, I am a remarried widow, and I'm happily married and love all the new experiences that we're having. And I would never want to give up any of the old experiences that we've had. And, life continues, and you kind of need to roll with the changes. And so this new identity of, I guess it keeps changing, and it should be changing for all of us as we grow through our lives.
Okay. Well, I think we're actually reaching the end of our time today. I have just one last question here. If you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would it be?
To newly widowed parents, I would say to give yourself a break. Please take care of yourself. Whatever it is that gives you joy or peace or rest, please do that for yourself. And to recognize how hard you're working. You are on 24/7 right now, and you deserve a break. You need a break. You're working hard. And if you've made it through today, then congratulations. And give yourself a pat on the back, because making it through each day is not easy right now. And it does get easier. It takes time, but it does get easier.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a great place to end. Thank you so much for sharing all of your reflections with us today. I think you being 8 years out, you have a lot of experience and perspective, and I think that's wonderful. And speaking for myself, I know you've been very helpful to me over the years. And I wish we'd met under different circumstances, but so it goes. So I'm very glad that we got connected a few years back. If anybody is interested in getting in touch with you and communicating, is there a way that they might be able to do that?
If anybody wanted to get in touch with me, I would love it if they would contact you and you could forward their information to me.
Sure. Okay.
That would be great.
Okay, that sounds great. So just for listeners, on my website, there's a contact page. You can send me an email, and I can hook you up with Katie if you're interested in talking to her. Okay, Katie, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
You're so welcome.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Katie Barrows-Rempe as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 16. Also, in case you haven't heard yet, I've got an exciting new resource for widowed parents. It's a monthly discussion group for the podcast, and it's on Zoom video conference, so you can join from home on your computer or smartphone. If you've ever been in a book club, it's a little like that, but we discussed the most recent episodes of the podcast. We had a great group of 7 people from 4 different states at our first meeting. The next discussion will be on April 7th. It's free, but you do need to sign up at widowedparentpodcast.com. And remember, you can help other widowed parents find this podcast by subscribing, rating, and especially reviewing in iTunes. It only takes a moment, and I'd be so grateful if you'd help get the word out in this way. Just go to jennylisk.com/apple for the link and instructions. Thanks for listening. Until next week, keep smiling.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.